When designing your home cinema system, obviously screen size is important, if not one of the two most important things in any home cinema. Size does matter, because you can get a screen that is too big, but you can also have a screen that is too small. In a cinema system, it might sound strange having a screen that's too big, but realistically this is a screen where, from the viewing position, you're having to physically turn your neck or move your eyes too much to see what's happening from one edge of the screen to the other edge. When we get into the more advanced system design course, we'll look at a template for how to select the optimal screen size for your room and seating position. But things to be aware of is obviously, if you are seated very close to a screen, you don't want the screen to be too large. If you're seated very far away from the screen, you don't want it to be too small. There needs to be a happy medium that accommodates to the main listening position or viewing position and all of the other viewing positions if you have a lot of seating in your home cinema. So naturally, room size is important. That's one of the first things you should look at when starting to decide on what size screen you will be incorporating into your home cinema. Then on to screen positioning. The screen height is important to get right, because if you have multiple rows of seating, you don't want people in the back row to not be able to see over the heads of the people in the front row. If you've only got one row of seating, or like a C-shape layout of seating, then this isn't so much of an issue. But a lot of home cinemas would have 2 or 3 rows of seating, and the rear rows and mid rows are placed on what's called staged areas. Essentially what that does is it just creates a step for the seating to be on, so that you naturally have that additional clearance to see over the heads of the people in front. Not just height, when it comes to awkward room shapes and aesthetics of how you want it to look. For instance, if there happens to be a door next to where your screen is going to be, or if there's a window or whatever. Ideally, obviously, you want your screen to be center of attention. You want it centered with where your seating is, but sometimes having some object in the way means you can't have the screen centered. So there will be a trade-off between aesthetics and what is practical. And of course, viewing distances play a massive role. If you, again, awkward shaped rooms, if you happen to have a very long room, then it means you might have too small a screen to accommodate for the viewing. So you just have to find where that ideal seating position is going to be as well in relation to the screen position. Aspect ratios. This is probably something you've come across before. So some films, or most films, use different aspect ratios. So aspect ratios are important because they apply to screens, but also the media that you are watching, or the content that you are watching. So most TVs, or most commonly almost all TVs, will have a 16:9 aspect ratio. These are the ratios as is dictated by HD, Full HD and Ultra HD resolutions. Or older square TVs like CRTs, for instance, had a 4:3 ratio, or in some rare cases a 5:4 ratio. And these are usually reserved for older SD content, as well as some modern HD but awkward aspect ratio content. For instance, the remake of the Justice League film was technically 1080p, but it was shot in a 4:3 ratio window. So yeah, weird. And then of course you get cinematic widescreen, which is what you'll find in most cinemas, and that can range from anything from 1.85 to 1 up to 2.39 to 1. Some of the common ones you may have come across is the DCI 4K standard, which is like Ultra HD but slightly wider, CinemaScope, which is 2.35 to 1, and then there's 2.29 to 1, etc. There are a lot of aspect ratios. The reason this is important to consider is if the majority of the content you'll be watching is 16:9 ratio, then using a television as your screen is fine, or using a generic projection screen is fine. If the majority of your content is going to be in cinematic widescreen, for instance, you may have to consider getting a different aspect ratio screen. And similarly, if it's going to be for older films, etc., consider a squarer screen. Now, why this is important is because that will kind of dictate the size of the screen that you can install in your home cinema system. For instance, a 100-inch 4:3 aspect ratio screen is vastly different from a 100-inch CinemaScope screen, especially when it comes to having to try and play content with a different aspect ratio on that screen. For instance, if you want to play 4:3 ratio content on a CinemaScope screen, the actual image size will only be somewhere around 60 to 70 inches, a lot smaller than the maximum screen size. And vice versa, if you were to play cinematic widescreen content on a 16:9 or a 4:3 ratio screen, then you'll get the black bars at the top and bottom. Likewise, on wider screens, you'll get black bars on the sides. Now, it is possible to get automatically adjustable screens and projectors with adjustable lenses, etc. But one of the easiest solutions here, especially when it comes to televisions, is that they can in an instant adapt to alternative aspect ratios without it really looking any different on screen. In some of the advanced courses, we'll look more into how to fully utilize different aspect ratios on screens and with projectors.